The Republican National Convention takes place in Milwaukee this week, and WDET will be there. Quinn Kleinfelter and Russ McNamara will talk to Michigan's delegates and examine the key issues. All that, plus NPR's special coverage this week here on 1019 WDET.
2024 political coverage on WDET is made possible in part by Ruby Duffield, Marianne and Carl Fontana, and listeners like you. Thank you.
This nation was founded on the principle that all men are created equal.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men
are
created equal.
I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear.
Created equal.
From WDET in Detroit, this is Created Equal. I'm Stephen Henderson. I've been thinking a lot the last 36 hours or so about what the ideal America would look like. What would we have seen in the last 36 hours in the ideal nation that we would all want to be living in? So imagine if President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump, the two presumptive nominees for this year's presidential contest, got together to address the nation with a really clear message. Something like, hey, we don't agree with each other, and frankly, we don't even much like each other. But we're both running for president because we love this country and because we want to lead it, all of it, with all of its people. Violence just doesn't have a place in our politics. And we're both kind of regretful that things in our nation have become so tense, so anxious, that violence is not just possible, it's becoming more routine. And we're regretful of the role we played in pushing the nation to this point. So going forward, why don't we just walk it back a bit? Now, I know that scenario seems absurd and just ridiculous. I'm pretty secure in saying it will never happen. And I don't think anyone believes it would even be possible. But seriously, what does that say about us? Our imaginations, our dreams in this country run away from the best possible outcomes. And they move really easily now among nightmarish scenarios and consequences. So much so that an assassination attempt in the middle of a presidential campaign isn't the thing that's surprising or unthinkable. What we can't picture happening is the response to it that we all need and deserve. We'd all be more shocked if Biden and Trump made some cooperative mass appeal to sanity than we are that someone took a shot at Trump during one of his rallies, which, let's be clear, they've often been about encouraging combat, this idea of fighting the other side. And all of this is just frustrating. It's infuriating, in fact. What happened to Donald Trump over the weekend with a 20-year-old shooter nearly assassinating the former president was one of the clearest signs yet of this nation's profound and abiding illness. The rush after the shooting was to try to discern what the political motive might be and what the political implications will be. But really, this wasn't about politics. This was about violence and about our comfort with the growing reach of violence into so many of our lives. We want to talk about all of this today on the show. But before we get there, I want to make a really important connection between what's happening in our politics and in the presidential campaign and what we try to do here on this show, Created Equal. One of the principles we use to define our mission and goals here is democratic participation, enhancing the role of citizens in shaping their own lives through the mechanisms and processes of our democracy. There is inherent equality in the idea of expanding that role and in the expansion of the number of people who understand and embrace that role. But what's happening in our politics right now, in this sudden, if not surprising overlap with the violence that ravages our society, is a fundamental threat to that democratic participation. It undermines not just the nation we want and deserve, but also it undermines the idea of who we all really want to be. Today, we're going to talk about what happened in Pennsylvania over the weekend, and we also want to talk especially about how we manage our democracy going forward. How do we continue this experiment without killing each other or trying to? In particular, we want to focus a bit on the role that information and misinformation play in raising the stakes here, and in some ways, increasing the likelihood of these violent interactions over our politics. And of course, we want to hear from you, our listeners. Obviously, you know what happened. You're paying attention to what's being said and done in the wake of this assassination attempt. What do you think we should be doing? What should our leaders be doing? How should they be relating not just to us, but to each other as we get ready for the Republican convention this week and the Democratic convention in a little bit? 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones. That's 313-577-1019. You can also go to Twitter and hashtag #CreatedEqual or @WDET, and we can make you part of the conversation that way. We've got two really great guests with us today to help sort through some of this. Barb McQuade is a law professor at the University of Michigan. She's a former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast, and author of a really, really important recent book about misinformation and the role that it plays in our democracy. Barb, always great to have you here. Welcome back to Created Equal.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Glad to be with you.
Yes. Also with us is Matt Friedman, who is a PR consultant and communications specialist, really someone who is a pillar in this community when it comes to the idea of crisis communications and how we deal with crisis. Great to have you here as well, Matt.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for treating this with the gravity it deserves.
Yes, yes. Barb, I want to start with you, and before we get to information and misinformation, which I know is what you are really focused on these days, and this wonderful book you wrote, Attack from Within, really focuses on the role that that's playing in chipping away at democratic institutions and values. But I just want to get your reaction first to what we saw over the weekend and what we are continuing to see and hear. There is a difference, I feel, between what we might have seen 5 or 10 or 50 years ago when something like this happens and what we're witnessing right now.
Yes, I mean, certainly a terrifying attack on a president, killed a spectator, injured 2 others. And so I think we cannot overstate the significance of this attack on one of the candidates for president from a major party. And but for, I mean, what, a centimeter, a millimeter, he would have been killed. And I think sometimes unsuccessful attempts don't get the same kind of attention successful attempts do, and is really just a matter of luck or inches, and it could have been a far worse tragedy. I think people are right to question the processes of the Secret Service. I've been involved in planning for special security events with the Secret Service. They are a very professional agency. But they, like many federal agencies, have budget concerns. The reporting is that They left the outside perimeter to local law enforcement, who often partners with Secret Service when there is a visit from a protectee. When we saw President Biden here in Detroit on Friday, no doubt the Detroit police and the Northville police, when he was in Northville, and Michigan State Police were there to enhance the work of the Secret Service. But I don't know how you let someone be on a roof 140 yards away with a clear line of sight. That is an incredible lapse that I think we will be having hearings about and learning more about how that possibly could have happened. And then, of course, in the aftermath, we live in times when we don't want to be patient. We want instant answers to everything. And it's going to take a little time for all of this to sort out about exactly what happened, who the shooter was, what his motivation was, whether he was working with anyone else. And people are no longer willing to be patient. We live in an instant gratification world. And so in the absence of information, people will fill that vacuum with either mistaken information, which happens, or deliberately false information. And so depending on your perspective, some say that this was a fake assassination attempt designed to, curry favor for Donald Trump, or others will say this was an intentional inside hit job by the Biden administration. I'm sure neither of those things are true. And yet, because of our deeply polarized times, I think that we are seeing this narrative on social media. So that's certainly something that is different in today's world than just a few years ago.
Yeah. Matt Friedman, I want to bring you into the conversation here. When you think about messaging and response to crisis, I think maybe this is probably top of the food chain in terms of the kinds of things that can happen that challenge our ability to do that. But I also want to get your reaction to what we've seen here, and especially to, again, this increasing overlap between not just hostile communication, but insightful communication. People gesturing toward violence and encouraging it in some cases, and the actual presence of violence in our politics. I mean, this is an apex for it, but it's not the only example.
Stephen, let me take you back just a little bit in something I've been talking to clients a lot about, even in the last couple of weeks, even in some meetings I have scheduled for this week. Once upon a time, when we would work with clients on crisis communication plans for events or other high-profile activities, security and communication were really separate. The security meeting would happen, and then maybe we'd catch the tail end of it and we'd talk about communication or vice versa. And I said this to a client in a recap meeting about an event just a couple weeks ago. I think now for the rest of my career doing this work, communication and security are going to be very closely linked.
They're the same thing.
There's almost no separation between the two. And that is because the threats of violence that are real, actual threats, not just fear, when it comes to high-profile activity with almost anybody, and the need to communicate and to plan to communicate in the event of those situations. And what I'm talking to clients about are some of the things that we saw over the weekend. What do audiences feel like they need in the event of a crisis, any crisis, but especially one that involves any kind of violence or really fear being injected into a crowd? And those two things are facts. Audiences crave and demand facts as quickly as possible. And number two, leadership and reassurance. And what we saw over the weekend on social media in particular is where exploitation happened of this desire, of this insatiable need that audiences have for facts and for leadership. And some leaders in politics stepped up, and in media, by the way, stepped up, and instead of providing facts and instead of providing reassurance, they provided political opinion almost instantly. And that was very dangerous. And I wish we could say to your audience, Stephen, it would be as easy as staying off social media when something like this happens. But it would be like me saying to the audience, close your eyes and don't think of a pink horse. What's going to happen immediately?
You think about pink horses.
so I think, what Barb writes about in her book and talks about so eloquently is so important for all of us to remember that as human beings, we want these things, and it's up to journalists, it's up to leaders to commit to delivering those things. I'm doing a training in a couple of weeks with a police chief and a fire chief and some other local officials, and these are the kinds of things I'm going to be talking about so they can prepare for disaster.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to continue this conversation about the assassination attempt at a Trump rally in Pennsylvania over the weekend. Obviously, we're going to keep Barb McQuade and Matt Friedman with us. We want to get going with you, the listeners, on the phones. Give us a call. Let us know what you've seen and heard since this incident that stands out in your mind. What do you think are the ways that we can better communicate about these things? Make sure that truth is the thing that kind of reigns, especially in places like social media. Also, give us a sense of your trepidation about the overlap of politics and violence in our society. Of course, this is not the only incident of it. It is a rather outsized incident, but it's not the only thing that's going on. What do we do to turn politics away from the violence that ravages the rest of America right now? 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones. That's 313-577-1019. You can also go to Twitter, #CreatedEqual or @WDET. We'll be right back with more Created Equal. Welcome back to Created Equal from WDET in Detroit. I'm your host, Stephen Henderson, and we are talking about what happened over the weekend. An assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump while he was hosting a rally in rural Pennsylvania, just narrowly missing, really absolute tragedy for the former president. We're talking about how all of this kind of fits into the political narrative that's unfolding in our country right now, the overlap of violence with that political narrative, and the role that information and misinformation play in all of those issues and dynamics. We would love to hear from you on the phones and on social during this conversation. Give us your reactions to what happened in Pennsylvania. Give us your reactions to the things you've seen and heard since then. How are you sorting through all of the information that's out there? How are you discerning what's true and what's valuable and what is maybe not true at all? What is harmful to the understanding of what is actually going on? 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones. That's 313-577-1019. You can also go to Twitter and #CreatedEqual or @WDET. We've got two great guests with us right now. Barb McQuade is a law professor at the University of Michigan, former U.S. attorney right here in Southeast Michigan, and the co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast. She's also author of a book about disinformation, Attack from Within, how disinformation is sabotaging America. We've also got Matt Friedman with us. He's a media and communications consultant and strategist, someone who really specializes in crisis communications. Barb, before we get to listeners, and of course we've got a lot of people who want to weigh in on this subject, I want to have you talk about the last 36 hours or so and the flow of information and the role that misinformation or disinformation is playing in all of this. In the first segment, you referenced some of the conspiracy theories that are cropping up. I do want to talk a little about those too. But what has been, I guess, the picture of the flow of information here, and how does this prevalence of intentional misleading, which is something you really talk about a lot in the book, what role is that playing in our understanding of what happened?
Well, I think that the FBI tried to give sort of a, textbook briefing over the weekend about what was known and what was unknown. President Biden spoke from the Oval Office, which I think is appropriate, condemning the shooting and um, pledging to do a thorough investigation and also pledging to ensure that there's adequate security at the Republican convention, which starts today. All of those are fine, I think. But, in this world where information moves so quickly, I think that amateurs are willing to fill in the gaps. And also, there is so much video evidence out there. People will take screenshots and then use it to support whatever narrative they want. There is reporting that there is also, foreign disinformation flooding the zone. So, foreign governments work to sow division in society, and they stoke that division. So there are hashtags saying fake assassination attempt, or that would be that somehow Donald Trump staged this whole thing to look like some strong hero, or hashtag Biden hit job, right? That this was all something orchestrated by Biden to try to take out his opponent. I think neither of those things are true. But, you can grab a screenshot that shows Secret Service taking Trump off the stage where he's kind of exposed. And they say, oh, no one would ever do this if this weren't an inside job. Well, in the chaos of shots fired, they're not perfect. And maybe what they did in their processes were so imperfect that there is going to be some accountability there. I don't know, but I think that we've lost the patience to wait for accurate facts to come out. I know from my own work, Stephen, in law enforcement, that so often when there was a law enforcement event, any sort of attack, you got a lot of conflicting information at the beginning because people's minds fill in what they don't actually know. It's why implicit bias is such a problem. Do you remember when the underwear bomber was on the flight into Detroit on Christmas Day,
Yes.
2009? The initial reports of that were that firecrackers had gone off on board because the pilots who were not back there heard some popping noises. Instead, of course, it was a bomb that went off, and that's what they radioed to the control tower. So that was the information that law enforcement had on the ground, and that's the information we got: firecrackers on board. Turns out to have been something far more serious, but in the early days, there's a lot of conflicting information, and so I think what law enforcement professionals will tell you is you have to be wait, you have to be patient, you have to let the facts develop, you have to interview people to find out what happened. But I think in our instant gratification world, we're not willing to wait for that. And so people will fill in the gaps with their own conspiracy theories to try to make sense of what they saw happen, and that others will, of course, will exploit the information vacuum to advance their own agenda.
I mean, in some ways, this is kind of a circular dynamic, right? The amount of false or misleading information that's out there makes people skeptical of truth, right? Of information that comes from almost any source, and that skepticism then leads them to be, vulnerable to misinformation. People who are kind of purposely putting things out there that are misleading. I mean, it's almost like the consumer here has no chance, no fighting chance to try to deal with this rationally. They're getting it on both ends.
Yeah, I think that's right. It becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy or downward spiral that you see something, say, see, that's exactly what I had in mind.
Right.
But I also think that there are political opportunists who are trying to use this moment and exploit it to advance an agenda that does not serve the public. What we need is, calm, mature leadership to calm everybody down to avoid this kind of thing. But instead, I think people are stoking the flames, when they say things like, we heard some political actors this weekend accusing the Biden administration of deliberate efforts. These aren't just crackpots on social media. I mean, J.D. Vance was one advancing this. Members of Congress saying that this was all deliberate, or even simply accusing politicians of rhetoric that leads to this. And I think that's right. I mean, when you frame Nancy Pelosi as the devil, is it any surprise that someone breaks into her home and attacks her husband with a hammer? I suppose similarly, some of the comparisons we've seen with, Donald Trump and Hitler has caused people to see him as this, devil who must be removed from society. Fair criticism is one thing. Attacking someone's policies, character, and other things are fair game. But I think when you cast it in terms of existential threats to society and demonic scapegoats, I think that there are some who are going to hear that as a call to action.
Yeah. Matt Friedman, I want to talk about the responses that we've heard from both the current president, Joe Biden, and the campaign of the former president since all of this. I started the show with this kind of pie in the sky idea that the best thing for us, the citizens of this country, would be to have seen the two of them together at some point, talking about the need to row back from this brink of violence, from this idea that this is not just about a contest of ideas, but it is this epic battle between right and wrong, and the other side will destroy the country if they get control of it. I wonder if you can talk about how they are thinking through how to talk about this. As I said, nobody expects what I was talking about to happen. That's not okay in my judgment, but it's just, I think it's just reality. But the crisis communication that we're seeing and hearing from them, I'm curious about your judgment about how they're doing that.
As I mentioned in the last segment, what audiences really crave in any crisis situation are facts and leadership. They want leaders to lead. And I think what we're seeing from the White House has been a visible president over the last couple of days, not just pushing paper and statements, but appearing in front of cameras to provide as much leadership as possible, at least what they know and they feel comfortable doing. We still don't have a lot of facts. I was kind of hoping that in the Oval Office address we'd hear some more last night, but as Barb indicated, the culture of law enforcement is to be very cautious, if not extremely cautious. And one of the things that we have to do with client situations sometimes is encourage them to move at the speed of news, to move as fast as audiences are and what they crave and what they demand. And how do you strike the right balance there? It's very difficult, but there's no question here, because we just don't have a lot of facts other than what were known, on Saturday night. There isn't really a whole lot new since then. There wasn't much said from the Oval Office. What we're seeing from the Trump campaign has been very limited social media statements. Have not heard from Donald Trump directly, have not seen the injury, have not confirmed, by the way, by anybody but him, that he was in fact hit by a bullet, and assume we'll get a lot more of that with the Republican convention starting, assuming we'll see him on stage tonight to say whatever it is he's going to say. But we hadn't heard from him since then, which is, I think, unusual and maybe not what his audiences want at a time like this.
Yeah. I want to talk about the calculus behind the idea of reaching out at this point for either side, right? If you're President Joe Biden, what would be the risk of reaching out publicly to sort of try to say something in concert with Donald Trump? What would be the risk if you're Donald Trump of reaching out and saying, "Look, I would like to say something with the president to get us away from this brink of democratic chaos in this country." I mean, I think we all know or believe that they wouldn't do that. But I guess one of the questions is why, given that I suspect most people would say that's what they actually really want to see. Or maybe I'm wrong about that.
I think in politics, it's just so different. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, there was a very serious situation involving a death at a workplace. And I got a call very early on a Saturday morning from an attorney saying, my client needs help. Can you meet with us this morning? And I said, yeah, what happened? And the attorney said, this awful thing happened, and the client doesn't know what to do other than he wants to do the right thing. And then let's help him figure out what that means and what it takes to accomplish that. And I'm just not sure that that happens in politics like it does in business, in a privately owned business in this case. Can we think of an example in politics where we've seen anything like this? I don't know. I think if this were two corporate rivals, I don't know, McDonald's and Burger King, you'd probably see them together. We know that we've seen it in sports where we've seen bitter rivals appear in public service announcements together and things like that. Have we ever seen anything in politics where not former presidents but current opponents appear in any way together? It's hard to break through cultures, and I think that that's why this idea, as noble as it is, as aspirational as it might be, maybe isn't even on the table.
Yeah. Okay, we need to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to get to your phone calls and social media messages here on Created Equal. We'll also keep Barb McQuade and Matt Friedman. If you want to join, remember, 313-577-1019 is the number here. That's 313-577-1019. You can also go to Twitter, #Created Equal or @WDET. We'll be right back with more Created Equal. Welcome back to Created Equal from WDET in Detroit. I'm Stephen Henderson, and I'm really glad you're with us. We're talking about the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania over the weekend. We're also talking about the role that information and disinformation has played in the way that we are understanding this, learning more about what happened, and the role it plays in our politics. Barb McQuade is with us. She is a professor at the University of Michigan Law School. She is also a former U.S. attorney here in Southeast Michigan and the author of a book, Attack from Within, which takes a look at the role that disinformation plays in our politics. Matt Friedman is also with us. He is a media and communications consultant and strategist, someone who really focuses on crisis communications. We want to hear from you, the listeners, as well. 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones, and you can go to Twitter and either #Created Equal or @WDET. Let's start today with Frank in Detroit. Frank, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I will be brief. And I will assume that the lady that was speaking did not mean it this way. But we have to be careful not to present this issue as though it was a both sides thing. Any black person who's had a job and screwed up at work and have the boss call them in when the white guy screws up and have the boss call them in and say, you guys screwed up, as though we're going to spread this responsibility around. Clearly, one side is far more responsible for stoking hatred. That's a fact. Mm-hmm. And to present it any other way is wrong.
Yeah. So Frank, I mean, I agree 100%, and I've been saying since Saturday night, and even before. Look, there's only one candidate in this race, one presidential candidate, who has even, not just encouraged, but I mean, nakedly kind of incited the idea that resistance of a violent sort is an okay way to sort of express your politics. Donald Trump spends a lot of time at his rallies talking about the need for that. But let's set that aside for a second. I think what I have been trying to do here this hour really is trying to push us a little bit beyond that, and to say, okay, what is the solution to this growing kind of marriage between our politics and the violence that we live with, right? What would turn things in a different direction? And I think that's a different question than who's responsible for what's going on or who we might be angry with. So Frank, I'm going to put that question to you. What would you say our leaders should be doing? What would you want to see done to stop what we are, I think, just increasingly being inundated with, which is that violence is just going to be part of our politics?
Well, clearly we need to return to sanity, but we can't achieve that until we get rid of this menace. And it is a threat. As I told to your screener, I've been a social studies teacher for a while. What I'm seeing today, what I have seen over the last 8 years or so, look, you don't have to take my word for it. Just do the independent research, and you will see how closely what is happening echoes what happened in pre-World War II Germany. Now, that being said, once we get that settled, we have to counteract a lot of things that have been drummed into us over the last decade or so. We have made being uncivil fashionable, being disrespectful a sign of authority and power. That's wrong.
Yeah. Frank, I really appreciate the call and the really thoughtful response. Barb McQuade, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to what Frank is saying here. There is not a balance when you think of left-right, and especially among our leaders, in terms of who is pushing us in this direction, and in some cases who is using and manipulating the idea of the power of disinformation, to gain advantage.
Oh, I completely agree with Frank that although disinformation is a tactic that can be used by any party and is used by both parties, by far it has been the far right extremists who have been normalizing violence. This idea that, Trump says, I am your retribution. They're not after me, they're after you. I'm just standing in their way, really stoking grievance and victimhood and all of these kinds of things. I think this normalization of violence means that anybody who might be a bit unhinged out there, regardless of their political preference, now thinks it's, okay. They've been given license to engage in violence. So I do agree with Frank, and I don't want to excuse it's certainly not all Republicans by any means, but Trumpism and the MAGA right has made normalization of violence part of their agenda, and it's a very dangerous thing. And I see, it's coming home to roost, and you once you unleash it, you cannot control who it gets used against.
Yeah. Matt Friedman, I think we're going to see a very different style of communication from Donald Trump this week. They were forecasting that he's ripped up the speech he was going to give, accepting the nomination, and will try to be bigger, more magnanimous, more embracing. How effective might that be, given the things that he's been saying for a really long time in our politics?
This isn't the first time we've heard that a change in tone is coming from Trump. In fact, we've heard about this change in tone several times. We've seen it a couple of times. It's been fleeting, and then he sort of reverts to his default setting once there's a restart of some sort. So I guess as an observer of all this, I'll believe it when I see it. We'll see how long it lasts, and we'll also see if it permeates through the convention. The way that these conventions work, as you know, Stephen, is there's speaker after speaker after speaker for days at a time. Not all of it is televised live in prime time, certainly. And will everybody stick to the script if, in fact, there's a new script? we'll see.
Yeah. Again, Frank, I really love that you called and shared your thinking about all of this. Let's go next to Dennis in Dearborn. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning. This is so helpful. And Barb, I just want to say I've watched you over the years and I admire your style. But what I'd like to say is I've been gaslit by my own left Democratic people. I've been gaslit by gaslighted, I guess is a better word, gaslighted by the extreme right. I see myself as not an either or, not a binary thinker. I put things on a scale and I try to figure it out. But very often I'm brought to be a binary arguer. Even though my instinct is the other. And so what I'm listening to today is to try to find out how can I move my needle in order to help. Stephen, I've talked to you before about my family dynamic. I work in an elections office as a volunteer, and I know that the elections are safe. I have a sister who knows the elections are crooked, and she holds on to that. And there, as much as I want to be flexible and back and forth, the truth has got to be the truth. And how do you get to it? And then between my sister and I, how do I move the needle, let alone my society? Amen.
Yeah. Dennis, I really love that you called and shared that. That frustration about truth, Barb, is real. I mean, the inability to get a lot of people to focus on what is true and how we know what is true is a kind of a core dynamic behind all of this trouble that we're having.
Absolutely right. And I think I so appreciate Dennis's frustration and desire to get past it, because if it reached the point where we believe that truth doesn't matter, we've really lost democracy. Democracy, of course, depends on an informed electorate. One of the things I wrote about in my book and some of the research that I did is about the way truth is disregarded in Russia. And it is an absolute tactic of Vladimir Putin to promote contradictory narratives so that people ultimately become so cynical that they don't believe anything is true. They shrug and they just said, truth is for suckers. Truth is for the naive. Honor, integrity, that's all garbage. Yeah, that's so yesterday. All I really care about is my individual prosperity. How are you going to deliver prosperity? And that's good enough for me because everybody's a bunch of liars. If that's what we believe, we've really lost the ability to control our destinies through democracy. And so I think we have an obligation as citizens to demand truth, to expect it, to call people out on lies. And there's political spin and there's outright lies. And I think, many of us have become disillusioned by things we've heard over the years, whether it's the Pentagon Papers about Vietnam, whether it's about Watergate, whether it's about, things we've been told about Joe Biden's mental acuity and his age, so many things that are very dispiriting. But there is such a thing as truth. When I was a prosecutor in court, I couldn't just make stuff up. I had to point to evidence, to facts, to objects, to witness testimony. There is such a thing as whether the light was red or green at the time of the accident, And so I think there are facts, there is truth, and we need to demand it from our leaders as part of the expectation of governing.
Yeah. Dennis, really appreciate the call and the thoughts there. Let's go to Evan in Detroit. Evan.
Hey, how's it going, Mr. Henderson? Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Thank you all so much, man. I appreciate what you all doing covering this. I just wanted to say I've been hearing a lot of people, and you're right, it's on both sides, claiming that this is a conspiracy. Like a lot of my friends on the left are saying that they think that Trump staged it. And then, you got people on the right that are saying that Joe Biden or the government or some, deep state plot. And I think naturally, like you said, people are kind of jumping to conclusions. I think we should wait for, more facts to come out. I know some people don't trust the institutions that are supposed to be delivering the facts to us. But I think it's just it's a bit premature and a bit irresponsible. I think about Sandy Hook, for instance, and people were saying that was a hoax. And they dealt with a lot of consequences behind that. So it looks like somebody's lost their life, and 2 other people other than Trump are critically injured.
Mm-hmm.
And, we talk about things like that. I just think it's irresponsible to say that, it was staged or our own government may have had something to do with this. I really don't know, but it looks like to me this was someone suffering from, some deep issues, that they had that, for whatever reason decided to take a shot at President Trump. I don't think it's necessarily Trump's fault either. We just don't know yet.
So Evan, I'm curious, how do you, like you say, you have folks around you who are kind of buying into the idea that this was some sort of conspiracy, either from the left or the right, and there's all kinds of information out there, some of it true, some of it nonsense. Talk to me about how you kind of refine the stream of info so that you can reach a reasonable conclusion. In other words, how do you avoid all of that and kind of falling into that trap of buying into conspiracy?
So what I try to do is just not assume and listen to as much information as possible. I did see a eyewitness account, or at least, he's claiming to be a witness, but he gave, a pretty in-depth account of him saying that he saw, the person climb up on the roof and take the shots. He's saying that he saw him, get killed afterward. And, I'm looking at other videos that are, from that day. I'm listening to what Joe Biden and, Trump's team and the Secret Service is saying. So just trying to discern the facts, trying to, listen to the people that were actually there and then wait. I would say not jump to any conclusions because there may be things that we never know. Yeah, we never may know.
Almost certainly. Evan, I really appreciate the call and the really thoughtful approach that you're taking. Matt Friedman, I feel like he's kind of the gold star here in terms of information consumer, right?
As I'm listening to Evan, Stephen, this is something that I've been talking to clients about in crises since the pandemic, and that is, I guess psychologists would tell us that denial is very common in times of adversity. And what we're seeing now sometimes is that audiences wish something wasn't true. We saw that a lot during the pandemic. That was really hard. It affected all of our lives in negative ways. We wished it wasn't happening. So there were those who just chose to believe that it wasn't happening. Because maybe it made it easier for them. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. But I do have to work with clients sometimes in delivering bad news and acknowledging that there are segments of the audience who are just not going to want to believe it because it's easier for them not to, and that happens in a crisis of a national magnitude like this, I think more often than maybe it used to.
Barb, it seems like Evan is exactly the kind of person who is in your book, you talk about the ways to kind of avoid all this stuff. He's doing all of that.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to Evan and other people like him. And frankly, I think we have a lot of people like Evan who use common sense. Unfortunately, some of the loudest and most shrill are those we see on social media or cable news who are, trying to stir up controversy when in fact, patiently waiting for the facts, right? What a novel idea that would be. Being mature about these things, understanding, policy differences and trying to work through those. But I draw inspiration from people like Evan because I think that, we can demand better leaders, but the way we get better leaders is starting with ourselves and by looking for leaders who will reflect the will of the people. Yeah. So thank you, Evan, and I hope there are more like him out there, and I'm sure there are.
Yeah, I'm not going to have time to go to this caller, but Ann in White Lake is calling to talk about the message at her church, I guess yesterday, was about all of this starting with us as individuals. And I really want to stress that one of the things that all of this has the effect of is making us feel very frustrated and helpless to make things different. And there are things that each of us can be doing in our individual lives, in our individual spaces, that push back against all of these dynamics and all of these trends. And it's really important to take advantage of those things. Democratic participation is one of them, right? Making sure that you exercise the rights you have as a citizen. Okay, Barb McQuade and Matt Friedman, it was really wonderful to have both of you here to help us discuss this. Thanks for joining us on Created Equal.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks for having the conversation.
That's going to do it for Created Equal. Remember, you can listen to recent episodes at WDET.org, and we would love if you subscribe to our podcast, where you can leave us a rating or a review. Created Equal is produced by Kerry Jr. II and David Lyons. The engineering is by Nate Bender. Audio editing is by Connor Anderson, and the music is by Sam Bobian. Created Equal is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.